If you're like me right now, you're probably finding yourself with some extra time on your hands. So, for the last 6 weeks plus, school buildings have been closed, access to public spaces has been limited or completely shut off altogether, and we're all mostly stuck at home, whether we like that or not. And before you tell me, well, Jesse, I still have homework, I still have schoolwork I have to do, I understand that, but let's be real. I know you're not spending 7 hours a day doing schoolwork, so you're finding extra time every day. I know that because my two kids don't spend anywhere near 7 hours a day doing schoolwork. And I bring that up because every Sunday I get this notification on my phone that details my phone usage for the week prior. It tells me how long I've spent and how much time I spend on certain types of apps. And I try to keep my time below 3 hours a day on average. That's always my goal. So when I got this notification a few weeks ago, I was really surprised because it said on average I spent 6 hours a day on my phone that week. So that's twice as much as what my goal is. Now, granted, a lot of that time was spent connecting with y'all through Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, with your parents on Facebook. But if we're going to be honest, not all that time was spent wisely. Not all that time was spent doing ministry things. A lot of that time was wasted. And as I contemplated, as I thought about that, reflected on how I was spending my time, I remembered a few verses from Ephesians 5, and I want to read these for you. Ephesians 5, 15 through 17 says, "Look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time, because the days are evil. Therefore do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is." I may not know exactly what the will of God is for each and every one of us throughout the entirety of our lives. I don't know the very specifics involved in that, but what I do know in the very least is that God does not want us filling our time with useless, wasteless, or wasteful, foolish things. And unfortunately, I think that's probably where several of us, myself included, are at right now with our circumstances. As I contemplated all this, as I started piecing it all together, how I was spending my time, how I could be more productive, making the best use of my time instead of wasting so much of it, I thought about the prophet Daniel. And you see, there's more to the life of Daniel than the lion's den and being friends with three guys who got thrown into a fiery furnace. There's so much more to his story that we may not be familiar with. And that's what we're going to do with this new series we're starting today, Determined, is unpacking the life and the example of Daniel. Because if you think about it, as we look at Daniel chapter 1 today, we're going to see some similarities between our current situation and Daniel's situation. So we're mostly stuck at home without many places to go, without many things to do, living in a time where there's a lot of things beyond our control that we have no influence over. Same thing with Daniel. Daniel was living in a time and a place under circumstances that were less than ideal, that he had little to no control over. And as we study Daniel, we might see some differences between the way we're responding now and the way he responded in even more difficult circumstances. So I hope as we begin that we see in context what Daniel was going through, and then maybe what an application is for us. So let's start with a little bit of background so we can fully understand the story of Daniel. So around the year 605 BC, Daniel was a teenager in Jerusalem, and he was likely a member of the royal family, or in the very least, a member of a prominent noble family. So that was in Jerusalem. Now, the nation of Assyria was this world power, but it was defeated. It was overthrown by another nation rising up in the ranks, and that's Babylon. Egypt, another world power, went to attack Babylon. Babylon turned the tables and defeated Egypt. So far, they've defeated two world powers, Assyria and Egypt. And now they go in and they force Jerusalem to surrender. When Jerusalem does that, Babylon comes in and takes several Jewish people captive, hostage. They take them back to Babylon. And this happened 3 different times over at least a 20-year period where Babylon came into Jerusalem, forced Jerusalem to surrender, and Babylon took back thousands and thousands of Jewish people. Now, that first wave of people, that first time they went in and took people captive, they took people of royal, noble descent captive. They wanted the best of the best. And included in that group of people was the teenager Daniel. So that's where we start as we read Daniel. So let's look at Daniel chapter 1. And I'm going to read to start verses 1 through 7. It says, in the third year of the reign, Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into Nebuchadnezzar's hand with some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. Then the king commanded Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family and of the nobility, youths without blemish, of good appearance, and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding, learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace, and to teach them the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. The king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate and of the wine that he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years, and at the end of that time they were to stand before the king. Among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. Daniel he called Belteshazzar. Hananiah he called Shadrach. Mishael he called Meshach. And Azariah he called Abednego. So we see that we, right now, are kind of held captive in our homes, right? We don't have the ability or the freedom or flexibility to go out as much as we used to, or as much as we would like. But that pales in comparison to what Daniel and his Jewish comrades were experiencing. They were held captive against their will in a strange new place. And they were being assimilated into Babylonian culture. And what I mean by that is they were being stripped of their Jewish identity and being retrained to become just like the Babylons. They were renamed, okay? They were taught a new language and expected to speak it. They were instructed in Babylonian culture and history. Even their diets were changed. So what Daniel and his friends had control over was really very little. So if you were in Daniel's shoes, how would you respond? Okay? Would you just accept defeat and move on with life in Babylon, choosing to live as one of the Babylonians? Or would you resist a little? Maybe fight back to maintain your identity, to maintain your faith, your beliefs, your family ties. Let's keep reading in Daniel and see what Daniel's response is. So Daniel chapter 1, verse 8. And this is probably one of the most important verses in the entire book of Daniel, in my personal opinion. It says, but Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself. Therefore he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord, the king, who assigned your food and your drink. For why should he see that you are in worse condition than the youths who are of your own age? so you would endanger my head with the king." Then Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, he said, "Test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you, and deal with your servants according to what you see." So he listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, it was seen that they were in better appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. So the steward took away their food and the wine that they were given to drink and gave them vegetables. Let's read verse 8 again. "But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself." So Daniel and his friends are being stripped of their Jewish identity, forced to live somewhere that they did not choose to live, forced to follow this king, and yet Daniel resisted. Daniel resisted giving in by choosing, by determining, by deciding, by resolving not to defile himself. So how is it that Daniel, a teenager, could be so determined to resist, in this case, the king's food? It said because even in exile, Daniel resolved to follow God first. So Daniel was well aware of what was going on, of what the king intended for him and his friends to become. And Daniel, in the middle of a bunch of circumstances and situations he could not control, still determined to follow God first. It wasn't just that Babylon wanted these Jewish youngsters to become strong, to become a part of their army. They wanted to completely erase their Jewish identity and replace it with Babylonian. They wanted to completely erase their faith and replace it with whatever the religion was, whatever man-made gods that the people were worshiping at that time. And he wasn't just supposed to be Daniel anymore, a Jewish man that was faithful to God. He was supposed to become Belteshazzar, a man faithful to King Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel, the Hebrew name, means God is my judge. Do you know what Belteshazzar means? It means protect the king. So the king was well aware of what he was doing. He was completely trying to strip Daniel and his friends of their identities, of their faith. And yet, Daniel was determined to put God first, to follow God first. So let's read the rest of chapter 1 to see how this ends up. Verse 17, "As for these 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. At the end of the time when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar, and the king spoke with them. And among all of them, none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they stood before the king, and in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and the enchanters that were in all the kingdom. And Daniel was there until the first year of King Cyrus." It was crystal clear who the king wanted them to be loyal to, but it was just as clear who Daniel had determined to remain loyal to. And we see in closing chapter 1 just how things turned out for Daniel and his friends. So they remained faithful to God, and God, in a sense, demonstrated his faithfulness to them by blessing them in the strange foreign land with promotions, with recognition, with unparalleled knowledge and wisdom and understanding and strength. So that makes me come down and conclude with just 2 simple takeaways from this chapter of Daniel. It said, even in exile, first point, even in exile, Daniel resolved to follow God first. And then not just that he was determined to follow God first, we see from his faithfulness that faithfulness is a determination and then a demonstration. And what I mean by that is Daniel decided first and foremost to follow God. And because he was determined to do that regardless of their circumstances, he's able to show that faithfulness to others. And when he demonstrated that faithfulness, God rewarded him richly. So during this time where we have all this extra time, what are you determined to do? What are you determined to become? What things are you filling your life with right now that have the ability to influence what it is you want to do and what it is you want to become? Have you determined to be faithful to God, to put him first, to follow God first? And are you demonstrating that faithfulness to him? How are you like or not like Daniel, and what needs to change so we can imitate his faithfulness? As we close, guys, I want you to remember, even in exile, Daniel resolved to follow God first. Even during this downtime where we're stuck at home, can we resolve to follow God first? And then Daniel's faithfulness was determined and then demonstrated. Is your faithfulness determined? And is your faithfulness being demonstrated? Guys, I love you. I hope you're using these classes, that you're listening, that you're watching. We're going back to a Wednesday night class this week online. And we're going to look at kind of the practical side of Daniel chapter 1, what it really means to us and what it looks like in action. Guys, I hope to see you Wednesday night. I hope you're doing well. Remember, if you ever need anything, just holler at me. I love you all. God bless.